Hope you got a good night's sleep. Missed you as well. We're here, as the chair said, debating a motion I moved for those who have just tuned in on privilege. And what that means is we had a witness here, the former Liberal minister in charge of the Liberal Green Slush Fund, Navdeep Bains, who basically gave one answer to every question, no matter what the question was last night. And as a result, was stonewalling, prevaricating, that fun word, and not answering questions anywhere near in the vicinity of what was asked. It didn't matter what the question was, the answer was the same, and the answer was it was a fair and open process of appointments. And he did the same, didn't matter whether it was coming from Conservative Bloc or the NDP. His answer was the same, regardless of the question. He didn't answer about the hiring practices of the former SDTC at CIBC where he worked. He didn't answer the questions about the phone calls that the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verscharon, who he appointed, that he made to her. He didn't answer the questions about anything to do with that appointment process or the appointment process that he appointed Andre Elise-Matteau for Cycle Capital, whose companies received 25% of the $1 billion Green Slush Fund money, received over $100 million while she was on the board. He didn't remember any of that. In fact, he couldn't even remember appointing anyone. He just said, I made 100 appointments.
Point of order. Point of clarification.
Now,
just one second.
There's no such thing as a point of
Perkins,
clarification.
yeah, sorry, I heard point of order first, so I'll go ahead, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yeah, just perhaps a point of clarification. I'm a bit confused. On the one hand, Mr. Perkins has said he didn't answer questions.
Order.
On the other hand,
come on.
I'm confused. He says he didn't answer the questions, and then he says he didn't recall
Yes,
and answer the questions.
Okay.
Which is it? He said he didn't recall, or he didn't answer. Which is it?
Mr. You're next on the list. You'll be able to.
Well, maybe he could get his story straight.
Back to reviewing your dictionary.
We're wasting our time.
Well,
get his story straight. Hey, Rick, get your story straight.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
All right, just one second, Mr. Perkins.
Mr.
Perkins, I have Mr. Perkins. You'll have the floor in a second. Mr. Perkins.
Every single issue he's ever spoken on.
Mr. Perkins. First of all, I'm going to ask everyone to respect the interpreters. And speaking over one another is not only makes it very difficult for them to do their job, it actually potentially can be damaging. So I'm going to urge you all to respect the team that's supporting us in our important work. Mr. Durnay, you have a point of order, I believe.
Over, and everybody was
Thank you.
Over,
yeah,
so
it's yes. All right. Mr. Perkins.
I'm not shocked that Liberals, particularly Mr. Erskine-Smith, who's a newbie on this committee, haven't done their homework, haven't read the documents, haven't looked at the spreadsheet from the Green Slush Fund of all the grants they made over the 20 years. I'm not surprised that he hasn't made the effort to do that. He's too busy interviewing the current finance minister, conflict carbon tax Carney, to do his homework on this committee. He's too busy promoting his podcast with the soon-to-be former Prime Minister and trying to rescue his career than doing his parliamentary work on this committee, which is to actually read documents other than the PMO speaking points that he's given that deal with the issue of the corruption of the $400 million of stolen money by Liberal appointees. I thought Mr. Erskine-Smith had more integrity than that, than to worry, not be worried about $400
Point of order.
million
Like, what is this
stolen
absolute
from
bullshit?
taxpayers.
This is absolute bullshit.
Whoa.
Come on.
Okay,
come on,
all right.
Come on. My integrity?
Let's,
you can fuck
okay.
right off.
Okay. Okay. All right. Mr. Perkins, I'm going to ask you to get back on topic.
Again.
I'm going to ask Mr. Erskine-Smith. I understand your irritation. First of all, your language. I'm going to ask you to retract your language.
I'll retract when he retracts. He impugned my integrity, deeply unparliamentary.
All right,
and we can both retract, Chair.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, well, I'm talking about your curse words, not what you actually said. Now, we all have ample time to speak today. we all can see that when we interrupt a member, everyone gets wound up. Let's just let everyone have their share of their time, and you're welcome to respond to it in your time. And I believe if we show each other the courtesy, while we might not always like what's being said by other members, I think the thing we ought to do is just listen and get through this in a civilized manner. Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm not going to press it with you, but I will ask you to use parliamentary language and not curse in a committee setting. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor again, and please stay on topic.
I will stay on topic. Witness testimony, such as Annette Fischerin, that said, which obviously MP Erskine-Smith hasn't read, said that she never applied, she said it 3 times, for a single job in her life, including this job. Yes, conveniently afterwards, she filled out the application after the minister called her twice to ask her to do the job. After Minister Baines refused to answer the question, even those phone calls or the content, perhaps MP Erskine-Smith could do some of that reading. Perhaps he could also do some reading about Andre Lise-Mateau, who former Liberal Minister Baines, overseeing the Green Slush Fund, appointed in 2016 to the board, whose companies got more than $100 million of Green Slush Fund money while she was on the board. Perhaps Mr. Erskine-Smith could read the testimony of previous witnesses, including the chair of the fund, who admitted that when Andre Lise-Mateau was moved by the Liberals to the Infrastructure Bank board for a new appointment, the first thing she did was approve $170 million for the slush fund chair's company, NR Store. But that would require a little bit of research. It would require research to find out that in 2023, the Natural Resources Department gave Ms. Fischerin's company $50 million. That's after the staff were employed at SDTC to find her company more money, since her company was rejected finally for SDTC money because of conflicts. These are the testimonies that the
Mr.
minister
Perkins,
refused
Mr.
to
Perkins,
answer.
Mr. Perkins, I have a point of order for Mr. Durian.
So I just want you to be fair when you're applying the rules, Mr. Perkins, and I didn't raise a point of order on this, but he evaded on the motion on the floor, the current motion on the floor. You allowed him to speak, so I'm expecting that you will not interrupt me when I talk about the same issues as Mr. Perkins is talking about. I just want the chair to apply the same rules for everyone. I'm taking notice and I'm recording what we've got blues, because I'll repeat them. If I find that you're not being fair, I will raise a
That's fine, but again, I'll just relevance, which I urge Mr. Perkins to get back to. No repetition and no reading. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Relevance, of course, is that these questions were asked of former Minister Baines, the architect of the Liberal Green Slush Fund, who refused to answer. He gave the same answer to every question. Every question, regardless what the question was, the answer was not relevant, and that's what prompts privilege. When we asked him about the issue of the appointment process of Ms. Fischerin, all he could say is, I made appointments, I don't remember. These things are why we're here on talking about the privilege motion I moved, because while it's true, witnesses can give answers to questions that members may disagree with, but they have to actually be relevant to the question. And he didn't give one single answer to any opposition member relevant to the question. And Mr. Erskine-Smith knows that because he was here in the committee and he heard it. Now, maybe he had a challenge understanding that when a member says, did you talk to Annette Fischerin in a phone call about the appointment, that he says it's a application process and a fair and open process. I guess he doesn't understand how to make the connection between yes or no, I spoke to her or I didn't, versus saying some automatron, hologram type answer where he was pre-programmed to say one line. All the time. And I understand that the Liberals are upset that every time we have a meeting, and we, except for former Minister Baines, that they're upset that we uncover and reveal more Liberal corruption, and all other witnesses have been here answering the questions and revealing shocking revelations about these Liberal appointees that were appointed by the Prime Minister, handpicked by the Prime Minister, and put in by Navdeep Baines. Somebody told him to do it because it's very clear he didn't know what to do, so he was just told something, because all he does is seem to repeat things that other people tell him to say. And we're trying to get to the bottom of that, and it's incredible that the privilege breach that we saw yesterday with former architect of the Liberal Green Slush Fund, Navdeep Baines, is not seen by Liberal members, is something to be troubled about. They're not troubled by the theft of $400 million. They're not troubled by the fact that that only represents half of what the Auditor General had available to look at. The Liberal members, including MP Erskine Smith, have never even once acknowledged the fact that out of the $856 million in the audit period that the Auditor General looked at, that only half of the conflict of interest were revealed, because she only looked at half the transactions. And shockingly, 82% were there. And Mr. Erskine Smith would have us believe that an ADM sitting in every meeting never reported anything to Minister Baines. About 82% of the time, these Liberal appointees voting money for themselves. Never once a senior bureaucrat, would have never reported that up to Minister Baines or Minister Champagne, who was also silent for 40 months on this and never said anything till it was public. These are the issues of privilege that former Minister Baines breached, and that's why we're here, and that's why the motion's on the table. And I will leave it at that for now, Mr. Chair, just because I'm sure we'll have great insight from the Liberal members, and perhaps an explanation from Mr. Erskine Smith about his language.
Next is Mr. Erskine Smith. You have the floor, please.
Rick, you impugn someone's integrity. You deserve every language that comes your way. There's nothing more important than a member's integrity, and you have no business impugning mine. Because what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now, Rick? You have brought a privilege motion, an incredibly high bar. And on what basis? Well, before Mr. Baines was even finished his testimony, you brought a privilege motion. We're happy to have him back and answer clear questions. And look, I'm not even disputing. You can say I didn't like all of his questions. He wasn't as forthcoming as I'd want him to be. You can't say I don't recall isn't an answer. That's what, on the one hand, you said he's not answering my questions. On the other hand, you're saying it's insufficient for him to say I don't recall. Unless you're accusing him of deliberately misleading you and members at the committee, unless that's the accusation, which I haven't heard, but if that's the accusation, then your privilege has not been breached. And I want to run through just how high of a standard we actually are talking about here, because and I would love at some point, I'll come back to this, but I would love the clerk and analyst to clarify that. I mean, when I run through the rights of members around free speech, the privileges of members, a breach of privilege occurs when there is a disregard or attack on the rights, powers, and immunities of the House and its members, either by an outside person or body or by a member of the House. That's what a breach of privilege is, okay? And all breaches of privilege are contempts of the House. A breach of privilege is always contempt. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Deliberately misleading testimony. In 2003, the former privacy commissioner was found in contempt of the House for providing deliberately misleading testimony during hearings of the Standing Committee on OGO. Deliberately misleading testimony. Is that the accusation? I haven't heard it. If you're going to make an accusation of breach of privilege, make sure it's consistent what a breach of privilege actually is. In 2008, Deputy RCMP Commissioner Barbara George was found in contempt of the House for providing misleading testimony during the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, hearings into allegations of mishandling of the RCMP's pension and insurance plans. We also know impeding access to the House is a breach of our privilege. The denial of access and significant delays experienced by members of the House constitute a contempt of the House. That's nowhere near where we are at the moment. Refusal to attend in the face of a summons. We had in 2013 a failing to allow a witness to appear before a Senate committee by the RCMP that was investigating harassment in the RCMP. That was found to be a breach of privilege, and rightly so. Refusing, failing to attend, or in that case, impeding the ability of a witness to attend. I could run down a longer list. You know, the United Kingdom on parliamentary privilege has a list of contempts here, where assaulting, threatening, obstructing, or intimidating a member or officer of the House in the discharge of their duties, deliberately attempting to mislead the House or committee, as I've mentioned, deliberately publishing a false or misleading report of the proceedings of the House, removing without authority papers belonging to the House, falsifying or altering any papers belonging to the House, deliberately altering, suppressing, concealing.
I have a point of order, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Excuse me just for a second. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Genuis.
Mr. Chair, this member who's speaking right now just had a full-on meltdown where he used a grossly, obviously unparliamentary language. He was asked by you to withdraw those comments. He refused to withdraw those comments. Frequently in the House, when you have even much more minor or marginal cases, members are required to withdraw based on the authority of the chair, and this member has just shown grotesque, flagrant disregard for the rules of the House, literally dropping an F-bomb and saying that it was deserved and saying he won't apologize. And I believe it is within your authority to tell him that he cannot continue to speak on the basis of his refusal to withdraw on parliamentary language. And obviously that's within your discretion. But this is not an ambiguous case. This is a Liberals desperate, having meltdowns on the microphone, using gross, foul language in unparliamentary ways. And
or how about interrupting someone who impugns my integrity, Garnett?
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I'm not going to get out of here.
I know the rules,
and you should follow them.
So Mr. Erskine-Smith, I
haven't mentioned anything about bathtubs, buddy.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, look, Mr. Perkins was under barrage yesterday in a manner that he thought was unfair. I would ask you to
hold on,
Mr.
Chair,
withdraw.
on that same point of order.
Sure. It's a request. I'm trying to keep things moving along here.
Well, I've heard him retract the comments.
Okay, well, then,
so I would ask you to go back to the Blues and check, because I've heard Nate Erskine-Smith retract his.
Let me just ask Mr. Erskine-Smith. Mr. Erskine-Smith, did you in fact withdraw?
Sorry, withdraw my remarks in relation to Mr. Perkins, or not talking about bathtubs, buddy?
The cursing. Mr. Durant seems is under the impression.
I would be pleased to retract my comments. I assume you will also ask Mr. Perkins to retract his comments where he impugned my integrity.
So I'll take that as a no. I mean, Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm not going to be over the schoolyard nanny. You have the floor, but you're conducting yourself in a manner that is not appropriate.
You gave us less than an hour's notice, Chair, if you want to talk about appropriate behavior.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, you repeatedly complain about this committee schedule. As I said to you in response to an email, you need to work with your team and your whip if it's not conducive to your schedule. You have the floor again.
Again, the threshold for a breach of privilege is incredibly high. We have to take this incredibly seriously where it occurs. And again, running down the list, falsifying, deliberately misleading, falsifying documents without reasonable excuse, refusing to provide information or produce papers formally required by the House, without reasonable excuse, disobeying a lawful order of the House, interfering with or obstructing a person who is carrying out a lawful order of the House, bribing or attempting to bribe a member to influence the member's conduct in respect of proceedings of the House, intimidating, preventing, or hindering a witness from giving evidence, assaulting, threatening, or disadvantaging a member or a former member on account of the member's conduct in Parliament, divulging or publishing the content of any report or evidence of a select committee before it has been reported to the House. I would love to understand I would love to understand how when Mr. Baines comes and says, I don't recall how that amounts to a breach of privilege. Might be insufficient. I say let's have him back. Answer an additional 2 hours of questions. No one's hiding from accountability. Let's have him back. But what is happening now is not only a waste of our time, and you might say, well, you guys are wasting time at the committee. Well, you know why we're spending time at this committee? So to make sure that this doesn't become a waste of House time. And we all know what's happening in the House right now, that we have privilege motions where the Conservatives have weaponized process to ensure that the House cannot function. And if this privilege motion were to pass, which would be absurd because it's not anywhere close to a breach of privilege, and the Speaker will swat it away. But if it were to pass, if we as a committee were to say, send it to the Speaker, well, we are going to waste countless hours. We're going to waste days. We know this because we see it right now. We're going to waste days of House time on something that is frivolous, absolutely frivolous. If we want to get answers from Mr. Baines, let's have him back for 2 hours. Let's have him back for 2 hours within 14 days. Please, let's stop wasting our time and making a mockery of the process of this House.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Next is Ms. Khalid. You have the floor, please. I picked up yesterday's speaking note. Pardon me, I jumped one. Excuse me. Mr. Drouin first. Pardon me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just a few things before I get going. I will say that I'm a bit surprised, and it's the first time that this has happened to me in 9 years, and I've had the pleasure of serving with an opposition chair by the name of Tom Lukiski, who was an honorable man and a good chair at government operations, never once called a meeting with 50 minutes notice. And I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I do think that is not being respectful of everybody's time. And on that particular matter, if we want to continue discussing this, I'm happy to sign a 1064 with the opposition. I'm sure they will want to come back next week, but I'm happy to sign a 1064 with you guys, and we can get to work next week if this discussion is not over. And I will happily draft it, and we can all sign this because I know this is very important to you guys. Secondly, I will talk about the bullying tactics from two members of this particular committee, Mr. Perkins and Mr. Genuis, who have instructed their fan club to call my office. And I just want you guys to know that I've instructed my staff to give your phone numbers. So they're calling my office and then they're calling your office, okay? So just so we're clear, you can do this all. You can do your little videos outside. You can do your Facebook videos after here. Just know you can do that, and you can instruct your fan club to call my office, but they're calling your office after. Absolutely, if you want selfies. But I just, I thought we had some decent respect. I've never done that to other members of Parliament. I don't care if you do that to me. I just want you to know the consequences of what happens after. Your staff will be more busy at your offices. So they're just redirected to your office, and it'll be a pleasure for me to continue doing that. On the matter at hand, again, I'm surprised that Mr. Perkins has a short memory because he knows Mr. Baines has asked the very same question that he's saying of Mr. Baines that somehow he did not answer. And I will quote, I don't recall a specific conversation, but I would say that it was not uncommon for me to reach out to CEOs and to engage them in the board selection process. I don't know what you call that, but that's an answer. That's an answer. Mr. Perkins doesn't like the answer because he's really trying hard to tie SDTC to ministers, and there's simply no connection there. He knows that. He knows that. And I'm quite surprised that Mr. Perkins, who has once worked at CIBC, would tarnish the reputation of somebody who's worked at CIBC and the institution of CIBC, because that's exactly what you're doing. That's exactly what you're doing. You're tarnishing the reputation of private citizens, and it's unfortunate. He is a private citizen now. Well, the wheel goes around, my friend, and one day it'll be you in front of that committee.
Mr. Perkins.
So again, why are we doing this study if the Conservatives have already made up their minds? They are not interested in investigating this stuff. They are using words like corrupt, and obviously they're calling me corrupt and blah, blah, blah. It's simply They're not interested in making this study. They're not interested in the words of the Auditor General. They're not interested in what the Commissioner of the RCMP has said. They're not interested. All they're interested, and we saw it yesterday again, and Mr. Genuis, he laughed at me the other day, but they are treating this committee like their own little private Facebook studio, and it's a shame. It's a shame. Have some decency for democracy. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. And I wish the kids in short pants on this committee sometimes would grow up. But some of them have, and some of them haven't. And on that, Mr. Chair, I would love to hear from the opposition on my proposition to sign a 1064. We can do this right now and come back next week, and we can spend a full day talking about this. I'm sure you'd love to come back too, Mr. Chair. I know you would. But the tactics that you've used today, I just want to warn you that we have lots of chairs who can do the same thing to other members. The consequences, the precedent that you have set to other committees is uncalled for, completely uncalled for. You're not being respectful of my time and of everybody's time on this particular committee. Tom Lukiski would have never have done that. And I'm not sure who's running the show now, but obviously they have no respect for members of Parliament. I'm close. I'll be here next week. I don't mind coming here. I can spend a week. And I'm sure we can come back on Thanksgiving Monday if you want. I'm here. I'm ready. So I'm still not hearing the opposition say they want to sign a 1064. This proves how dedicated they are to this particular cause.
You don't understand the process. That's the long-standing order. Yeah, like at a basic level. You don't need a
Order, Mr. Genuis.
Actually, Mr. Genuis, you can sign a 1064, and you have to deal with the proper matter 1064 at first, and then you deal with the suspension. Just so you know, just check your standing order, buddy. So here we are on the matter of this question of privilege, which has been raised without even having to hear completely what the member have said. This was submitted half an hour before the testimony was completed. So we know this was all made up. So how serious are these guys about finding the truth? They're not. Ils sont pas sérieux. On est ici à parler d'une motion.
This is a joke. We're here talking about a motion that is meaningless. Mr. Porkins had the opportunity to question the witness in June. I don't know how long he needs to ask questions. And I can't believe the other parties in the coalition are helping the Conservatives on this motion. And what I find shocking is that whether it be members of the Conservative Party, the Bloc, or the NDP, but it wasn't Mr. Cannings that I had in mind. Several times these MPs mentioned that they were not satisfied with the answers provided by a witness, but because it was not a former Liberal minister, then there was no question of contempt of Parliament. So a standard is a standard. You should apply the same standard to everybody. If you think a witness failed to answer our questions properly, if you raise a question of privilege on about one witness but not about the others, well, then where's this will to find what the truth is? I'd like to stay on the list until Miss Alette. I think she's the next one on the list. I think she's having a conversation with Mr. Cannings. I'll let her finish her conversation. But in my opinion, Mr. Perkins's motion is too severe. Mr. Erskine Smith summed up the facts very well. He said you have to take questions of privilege seriously, and not only because we're dealing with a former Liberal minister. We shouldn't be partisan in this type of situation. So I would argue that we should withdraw the motion and we should deal with the issue. And maybe I'm theorizing on why they don't believe Mr. Baines answered the questions, but might be because the official opposition keeps changing their players, whereas we're always the same people here. It's like there's a rat pack on the other side of the table. So if you're not satisfied with what witnesses said, then maybe you should go and check the blues. I really can't imagine how Mr. Baines failed to answer the questions that were asked. Obviously, the opposition is looking for a culprit. They've already accused Mr. Baines when they say he was the architect behind SDTC. They already accused him without providing a shred of evidence that he was involved in SDTC directly. And I would remind you that the Auditor General, the report by McCarthy Titro, Mr. Chabot's report, and even the review that's occurring as we speak, none of these are going to say that there was too much involvement by the minister or the minister's office. And that is the heart of the issue here. This is what the opposition is trying to put forward, this link between the minister and SDTC. And there is no link. And so we're turning around in circles. We're wasting time. And I'm starting to question our ability to actually seek and find answers. So if I really understand what's going on, the opposition doesn't care about the Auditor General, doesn't care about any of these reports, and they just want to create a link between a minister and SDTC, even if there was no link whatsoever, aside from the fact that there was an agreement signed. The minister has nothing to do with day-to-day operations, and that's what the opposition doesn't seem to understand. So I will take a short break, Chair, to have a drink of water and give the floor to Ms. Khalid.
Ms. Khalid, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to raise some concerns here because, you know, I had a full day planned. My constituents need me for so many different things. And for this meeting to be called in within, for me, it was a half-hour notice. And as you can see, my hair is still wet, trying to get through the day and having to change a lot of what my schedule had been today. I'm not sure why you would do that, Chair. So perhaps I can seek some clarification from you and the clerk before I continue with my remarks.
Ms. Khalid, the floor is yours. The chair is not required to answer why a meeting was called. We suspended in the middle of our debate. Resources did not permit me to go further last night. I picked it up at the earliest possibility.
So I'm not going to get clarification from the clerk or yourself as to why we felt that we are going to recall the meeting without giving members the notice. I mean, for myself personally, I had a half-hour notice that this meeting was going to continue. But you know what? I'm more than happy to continue with where I left off last night, where we had 5.5 hours long conversation about how this motion is actually not a privileged motion. And I am more than happy to continue.
Point of order?
I have a point of order, Ms. Cleary. Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Perkins.
The chair has already ruled it's a point of privilege, or we wouldn't be debating it. So I would ask the member not to question the chair's ruling on that.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary, you have the floor again.
Got you. Look, I understand and appreciate the importance of the work that this committee does. I understand and appreciate why we do this work, because ultimately we need to find accountability for the hard-working taxpayer dollars that Canadians spend to keep our democratic institutions going and alive. So I am not sure why we are wasting those said dollars that Canadians have worked very hard to build on a privilege motion that is, in its intent and purpose, to delay democratic proceedings in the House of Commons in our Parliament. Our job as members of Parliament is not partisan. I support my constituents regardless of which party they support. And that is my job. And I do it because I love to do it. I have conversations with conservatives in my riding all the time. I have conversations with New Democrats in my riding all the time. And I try to understand and appreciate where they're coming from. And that is the ultimate of who we are as elected representatives in our communities, and how we bring that voice here up in Parliament. And it is a diversity of opinion that we really have high regard for. But what really hurts, not us individually, and yes, us individually, but us as collectively, are partisan games. And this is exactly what this motion is. It is not about getting to the bottom of what happened with SDTC. It is definitely not about what happens going forward. And we see that there is a plan from the minister as to how we go forward. And that is that transfer to the NRC. That is a really concrete plan as to how to move forward. This entire program has been implemented over the past decade. And what I have seen over these past number of meetings from my Conservative colleagues, from my Bloc colleagues, and from my NDP colleagues as well, are very partisan questions where any witness who comes before here is not given the opportunity to actually respond to the questions that are being posed. They're being cut off. They are props, I find, in how the opposition wants to be somebody. And that's not fair to Canadians whatsoever. I am more than happy to have this witness in question come back before committee for however many hours the committee wants. But when we're questioning, whether a witness has been able to answer questions to the satisfaction of the questioner, and in this case it's the opposition, I find that to be quite damning. Because, one, Charter of Rights is implicated with respect to how people are able to express themselves. Our parliamentary rights and privileges are implicated with respect to how do we determine what is satisfactory to one party versus another party versus another party. So when we're talking about satisfactorily answering questions that have been posed, regardless of who they've been posed by, what is the ultimate goal here? What is the objective? Why do we have to now question who's right and who's wrong amongst us as members of Parliament, not even the witnesses who are here to provide expert testimony on the issues that we discuss on a regular basis? And yesterday I raised this point that the motion itself presumptively called the witness a liar beforehand. So how do I know that members opposite are not trying to use this motion to create their partisan games, to work with Russian rebel media,
Point of order.
to...
Just 1 sec, Ms. Khalid. Yes.
I will
Mr.
cite Standing Order 11.2. For 2 hours, MP Khalid said all of this last night, about
Yes.
4 times.
Yeah.
So she's repeating last night. So if she has something new to offer, I would encourage her to do so or move on to the next speaker.
Yes, Ms. Khalid.
As the member can see, I have no notes in front of me. I am not repeating myself. I am not going verbatim. And Chair, yesterday you did say that members should not be reading from notes. I'm not reading from anything. I'm actually talking about what is valuable to our democracy here. And this ain't it. This absolutely is not it. And for Mr. Perkins to call a point of order on something that he knows is bogus is very, very unfortunate.
Ms. Khalid, as I mentioned, repetition on a
I'm making
member.
a point, Chair.
Pardon me. Well, it is getting very close to what was said yesterday. You have the floor, but again, I will just repeat that it's not just reading; it's relevance and repetition. The floor is yours again, please. Yes, Mr. Deering.
On that same one, I keep hearing the opposition saying corrupt, liberal, green slush fund. That's repetition. So I'm just expecting.
Okay,
Mr. I'm expecting the same
yes.
level of
So
being
hold
fairness.
on. All right. So, unfortunately, we've heard those words being thrown about on both sides. That's sadly the business we're in, the school of hard knocks. The point that for standing committees is that if the arguments begin to go repeat. So you're welcome to make arguments that speak to the motions, but repeating the same arguments again and again is what is not permitted. So, Ms. Khalid, you continue to have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your clarification. The point that I'm trying to make today, that I did not make yesterday, that I have not made, I'm not sure, how your standards of repetition would work in this committee, regardless. But the point that I'm trying to make is that this does not have to be a privileged motion, because we know where a privileged motion leads, and we know the partisan hacks and their objectives on what a privileged motion can do. What I'm trying to say to this committee is that we can achieve the objective of having that witness back before this committee without this being a privileged motion to have conservative hacks jam up the work that is being done in the House of Commons. We can achieve our objectives without being super partisan. We can achieve the objectives of this committee without being super partisan. I use that as a better way of framing it, Chair. I am more than willing to work with all members on this committee to ensure that the work and the objectives of this committee is fulfilled. And what is that work and objective? It is to make sure that taxpayer dollars are held to account. It is to make sure that on this specific issue, as has been acknowledged by all of my Liberal members here, as has been acknowledged by everybody at this table, wrongdoing happened. There was no ministerial influence on that wrongdoing, but the government does have an obligation to act on this, and they have acted on this. And if members on this committee want to have a witness reappear to answer the questions that they need answered, we can do that without setting terrible precedent within the House of Commons by use of a privileged motion. Because that privileged motion, as I think we can all agree around this table, is not meant to get to the bottom of what needs to happen. It is to jam the work, the legitimate work that Canadians expect us to do in our Parliament. And that is really unfortunate. You look very impatient, Mr. Chair. You called this meeting in a half hour's notice. And I am here to help express the viewpoints of the majority of reasonable Canadians who want to see Parliament function, who want to see Canadians have that representation, sure, but also to see work being done. And the fact that this motion has been moved in this committee for the exact purpose of stalling work in the House of Commons is unfortunate. There are so many significant bills that are going through the floor right now. And what are we doing? We're doing privilege after privilege after privilege, because God forbid that the privilege of those folks is violated. God forbid that their privilege is ever in question. Privilege, Chair. Not a right, a privilege. I have a right to have a voice in this place. I have been elected by my constituents to have a voice in this place to speak for them. And they don't care about Mr. Perkins' privilege to be satisfied by a witness's question or answer. There are ways in which he can get the answers that he rightly deserves. Is this the right way? No, it is not. The right way is for us to be able to collaborate, to be able to identify what the issue is, and to find ways to get to the solution of that issue. And we have proven in the past that that has been possible. We have been able to work together, to come together, and do the right thing for Canadians and by Canadians. Why are we here today? Why are we here on this last-minute called meeting to discuss what? To discuss an issue that could have been dealt with by your own discretion, Chair. By your own discretion. And the fact that we haven't gotten there tells me that there are nefarious purposes as to why this privilege motion was moved in the first place within this committee. And I cannot, in my morals and in the responsibility that I carry for my constituents, support this nefarious purpose whatsoever. I would recommend and highly suggest to my opposition colleagues that this motion needs to be withdrawn and be replaced with another motion to say this witness needs to come back. This witness absolutely needs to answer the questions that all of our colleagues across this table have for this witness. But then we also need to understand and appreciate how the report is going to look like also. And not be redundant in the questions that we're asking time and time again of the same witness, badgering, calling witnesses liars, etc., etc., etc. It's not appropriate. And quite frankly, it is beneath us. The Public Accounts Committee has a higher mandate than to be political tools for the opposition. And you, Chair, I know how much principle you have in how we conduct ourselves in the House of Commons and how we conduct ourselves in our constituencies. And the purpose of how the work here happens to serve the purpose of those exact same constituents that we serve. So I would again implore yourself, Chair, firstly, to find that this motion is out of order because there has been no violation of privilege. But if you can't find that for the sake of your own constituents, then I would encourage you to work with your opposition colleagues and withdraw this motion so we can put forward a more concrete, a more substantial motion to say, yes, we need this witness back. We need him to answer the questions that any committee members may have. We want to send him written questions that he may not have answered in this committee. There is no privilege that is being questioned here, Chair, and you of all people know that. So I put that proposal forward to you, Chair, firstly, to consider whether this motion is out of order, which I think that it is, and secondly, to encourage your colleagues to withdraw this motion and put forward one that is not so partisan-y, one that encourages all of us as committee members to work together and summons the witness that we have any challenges with and to help them answer the questions that we have for them. And lastly, to be able to send in written questions that any of our members may have and has been raised by members over this course of the past 2 days, to have those written answers back. Because we can't go from 0 to 100 all the time. And we have seen in the context of what has happened over these past couple of weeks and months is the use of parliamentary procedure to to play political games to stop the work that Canadians expect us to do. I will park my comments there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And far from being impatient, the chair is fully engaged. I've been reaching out to the vice chairs to try to find resolution here. And a note, your hand is up to speak again, so we will add you to the list. Mr. Stewart, you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we come to public accounts to question and to provide oversight of taxpayers' dollars, to check for value for money, whether or not it achieved value. Members have privileges here. One of those privileges is when you come into these hearings, you're not here to evade, you're here to answer questions, important questions. 186 conflicts of interest at first glance were found by the Auditor General. The taxpayers deserve clarity, and they deserve accountability and the oversight that we provide. It's deeply disappointing and alarming that Liberal government members, the committee members here, don't want to simply find the truth for Canadians. There are no points for evading questions at a hearing such as this. This brings us precisely to the moment we're at. Mr. Baines knows the political process. He knows what is acceptable, he knows what is not, and he would know what it means to be held accountable and to be transparent with taxpayers' dollars. He would have had to be held to a higher standard. He was a cabinet minister. He told the president of STTC, and I quote, "They will manage her conflicts as they appointed her the chair." Though he's not a politician today, there's no points for evading or refusing to answer the questions posed by committee members. He is, however, accountable for his time in office. He was and is and will always be a member of the Privy Council, forever bound by those rules. $400 million is a lot of money.
I believe Mr.
Yes.
Stewart is reading from notes.
Yes.
Just a few things I scribbled on paper.
Yeah, I was watching that. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Pratt. I don't think so. I've been watching it. He is allowed to refer to notes, but he just cannot read those notes. So, Mr. Stewart, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I was saying is Mr. Baines is accountable for his time in office. He's still accountable because he was a member of the Privy Council, therefore forever bound by these rules. $400 million is a lot of money. It may not seem like a lot of money to some of the members of the governing party, but I'll tell you what, Mr. Chair, when you have record numbers at food banks and carbon taxes with record inflation and inflating grocery prices, and people in my constituency in Miramichi-Grand Lake that call me on a daily basis choosing between medications and groceries, sometimes fuel and groceries, mortgage rates are going up, interest rates are going up, rent is going up, all of these problems on the watch of the current government. You know, I remember in the 90s, I was in high school when Jean Chrétien was the former Prime Minister, and I remember hearing so much about the sponsorship scandal. And the only reason I bring that up today is, for its time, that was quite a thing. It upset Canadians, very clearly. But the interesting thing today is this scandal in particular is 8 times larger than the sponsorship scandal. 8 times larger. This is a massive scandal. It's a massive misuse of public funds, $400 million of which there was no value achieved. So the reason why we want this sent back to the House with the production of documents, and the reason why we want this privilege to pass is because our questions were not answered. The questions of other members of other parties were not answered. And when the questions are not answered by the individuals that have those answers, that is our privilege to get those answers for the public in this country. So I would say that it's deeply disappointing that the Liberal members are not supporting this privilege motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Up next is Mr. Genuis. You have Mr. Genuis. Mr. Genuis, I think I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes because there seems to be a discussion on the side, and maybe it will lead somewhere. So I'm going to suspend. If everyone could take their seats, please. I'm going to recognize. I'm going to recognize Madame Saint-Clair Dengagé, s'il vous plaît. Vous avez la parole.
Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. I think while we were suspended, we were able to reach a compromise that is more than reasonable, in my opinion. I'm asking for unanimous consent to present a motion and discuss a motion that would say the following: that the committee invite Navdeep Bains to appear for 3 hours and talk about the SDTC report within 21 days of the adoption of this motion. Inaudible. 2.5 hours? 3 weeks, 3 hours. They agree with 3 weeks, 3 hours.
You see, to swap Madame Saint-Clair Dengagé's motion for what Mr. Perkins
Excusez-moi,
put
Monsieur le
forward.
Président.
Oui.
C'est le
Excuse me. Unanimous consent to adopt my motion immediately.
Je cherche le consentement unanime pour la.
I am seeking unanimous consent.
In a little bump. What was sent to the members, c'était 2 heures, pas 3. Alors,
Was 2 hours.
c'est quoi que vous voulez?
What are you asking for? Just for your information, during our negotiations, we talked about 21 days and 2 hours, and now we've just found out it's 3 hours. It's scandalous. No, it's not scandalous, but I'd like us to respect what we negotiated.
Don't.
I think we should settle on 2 hours. This will ensure the member
Très
comes
bien.
back.
On reste à 2
We've already
heures,
had
ce
an
qui est
hour.
envoyé.
And
OK. Donc, 21 jours, 2.
So 21 days, 2 hours. Do I have unanimous consent? Point of order. The translator.
My understanding was it was summons. Possiblement,
Convoqué à comparaître. C'est un summon.
De traduction, mais
Et ça a été envoyé.
Summons. And this was sent by email. The interpreter does not have the...
So I'll hear you in a second, Ms. Yip. So we're looking for UC to approve this motion as it has been distributed to the witness will appear within 3 weeks for 2 hours. Yes, Ms. Yip.
Make sure that we're all on the same page. Can we just read out loud for what the motion is?
Sure.
Just to make sure, okay? And en français aussi.
I will do that
Okay.
dans les 2 langues officielles.
In both official languages, the interpreter does not have a copy of the motion in the booth. In French, it says that the committee summon Navdeep Bains to appear for 2 hours about the SDTC report within the 21 days following the adoption of the motion.
The committee summoned Navdeep Bains to appear to the committee for 2 hours on the matter of SDTC within 21 days of the adoption of this motion. Point final. Mr. Drouin.
Merci.
Yes, Mr. Drouin. Yes, just a point of clarification. We're asking for unanimous consent for Ms. Sinclair de Gagne's motion, which means that the motion that we debated at length will be set aside. I'm still in the list for the motion of privilege. We'll continue the debate, but it will adjourn very soon. So then we'll have to continue debating the motion of privilege. Inaudible microphone. Okay, that's fine.
To pass, with your approval, the motion put forward by the block member. Yes, yes, yes. I just looking on the screen. I see heads nodding in the affirmative. No opposition. I declare the Bloc Québécois motion passed.
Je récupère le...
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Donc,
So, since we were able to reach a consensus on the motion that I just tabled, I would ask this committee to adjourn, please. I ask for a vote on adjourning the committee.
Adjourning the meeting? No? Very good. This meeting, have a nice Thanksgiving recess week. Oh, you want a recorded vote? On an adjournment? All right, the adjournment is passed on division.